Hey everybody, welcome to Composer Talk number 006 with Jason Pause. I was very fortunate to speak with Jason. He is a very seasoned orchestrator. He got his start in the early 2000s. He's worked on great films such as Lord of the Rings. I think he worked on The Hobbit. If you just check out his IMDb page, you will just see that he's got a list of credits. But I was honored to talk with him. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Jason. It was a really great time talking with him. So enjoy.
So I grew up in Illinois and went to college at University of Michigan, then transferred to Berklee College of Music, then came back and played for about a year in Chicago with Barrett Deems in his big band. Mm-hmm. And after that, my wife and I, who is also a musician, we met while we were at Berklee.
Nice.
Moved out to New York because she really wanted to work in the jingle business. And she had landed an internship with a composer out there who had done a lot of big stuff. Unfortunately, right when we arrived in New York, he had a bike accident and his company went into the tank, and it was just everything went bad for him. And so we were stuck in New York with no job and no money and broke, just out of college. It was just desperate. So I started temping. She found another little internship that turned into a full-time job at another jingle studio, just basically working front office and things. Nice. And I started temping in everywhere I could, the temp agency would send me.
Right.
And it was while Danita was at this jingle house that she got an opportunity to write. They needed to fill out their portfolio or fill out their pitch for a commercial. And they'll have, they had they're going to put 15 different options in for this client, for one of the big ad clients. And so they asked her if she wanted to write a few tracks. So she brought them home because it was for vocals and percussion.
Okay.
And she loves writing for vocals. I love writing for vocals, and I'm a percussionist.
Yeah.
So we wrote these tracks, and we actually won the account. It was a worldwide Crest toothpaste commercial.
Oh, wow.
And played on every continent except Antarctica, I guess.
I'm pretty sure I heard it. Probably heard it.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. This was, there was a 2001, I think, maybe. Or 2000, can't quite remember.
I'd have been in college, yeah. So I probably did.
Yeah. Crest Extra Whitening Toothpaste. So it played around the world, and then that got us health insurance. Mm-hmm. And while I was in New York, a neighbor upstairs from us in my apartment building, this is one of these classic New York kind of happenings. It turns out he had gotten us the apartment in our building because he knew one of Danita's friends from college was friends with him, and he talked to the super in the building and got us our apartment.
Nice.
And then he was a musician also. Cool. And he had been working for Elliot Goldenthal.
Okay, I've heard that name.
He had been doing orchestration and music prep work for Elliot. And one day out of the blue, he came. So we were always running up and downstairs, hey, do you have an extra patch cable, or would you listen to this and tell me what you think, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And one day he walked in and said, "What are you doing?" We're putting together this application for the ASCAP Film Scoring Fellowship. And we had already gotten the BMI Pete Carpenter Fellowship a few years before. So we'd spent, a couple months out in LA working with Mike Post, which was a wonderful experience. And he was the person who actually convinced us to move to LA eventually.
Okay.
But then, so our friend came downstairs and we were putting together an application for the ASCAP workshop, just kind of on a whim. We were just throwing some stuff together, and he was like, what's the ASCAP workshop? Oh, well, you should throw in an application. And we got a form, and I actually filled it all out for him and everything and said, here, just sign it and put your demo on and send it in.
Right.
Well, he ended up getting a spot in the ASCAP workshop. Cool. And we got a phone call because I knew Michael Todd and Sean Lamont over at ASCAP at that point. Mm-hmm. We got a call from, I forgot which one of them, saying, we had one more spot in the workshop, but since there's two of you, we couldn't really fit two people in, and so our friend Winfried just felt horrible because he got this thing, and then we got the bump, and we really didn't care because it just didn't care at that point. But later on, Winfried called me up out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, do you know this composer Howard Shore?" I said, "Yeah, I know who he is." Well, I've got this job. I'm going into his office, and they're going to offer me a job, and I'm not going to take it. I'm going back. He was from Germany. He says, I'm going to go back to Germany. He says, I'm tired of this. I've got a teaching job over there. He says, so wait 15 minutes and then fax your resume to this number. This is when we were still faxing.
Right.
Fax your resume to this number, and then it'll come over the fax machine while I'm talking about you, because I'll recommend you for the job instead. You'd be perfect for this. Oh, okay, fine. And so I ended up getting the job working for Howard Shore.
Cool.
And that was on Lord of the Rings: Two Towers.
That's what I was gonna say. I was like, yeah, that sounds about Lord of the Rings time. So yeah, that's awesome.
So I ended up starting to work on Lord of the Rings: Two Towers, and I was kind of assisting Howard with orchestration, and then stayed on for Return of the King. And then it was after that we had saved up enough money to move out to Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the best bits of advice we got in our lives was from Mike Post. And when we were doing the fellowship with him, he basically, at the end of the fellowship, he pulled us into his office and he says, okay, sit down. We got to have an important talk. Okay, Mike. He says, look, you guys, you have the skills to do the job and all this other stuff. He says, but you got one big problem. Oh. Okay. We're sweating a little bit. Like, all right, Mike, what's the problem here? And he says, you're on the wrong damn coast. He says, what are you going to do in New York, with this? And I said, well, he's like, look, there's daytime TV, which is shown up by like 3 people. He said, there's independent film. You're not going to make a living doing that. He says, what are you going to do? Commercials the rest of your life? He says, you hate doing that, which we didn't really like the commercials.
Yeah.
He says, you need to go back to New York. He says, you need to save up enough money to be able to move out to Los Angeles and come here for an entire year and just sit and do nothing.
Wow.
And we said, really? He says, yeah. He says, because nobody's going to hire you in your first year.
Wow.
And he was so right. So we went back to New York. We saved up all our money, scrimped and saved every last penny we could, figured out how much it would take for us to live on in LA. And then after doing Lord of the Rings, we had enough money in the bank and we moved out to New York, and he was right. I think even after doing Lord of the Rings, I think we got maybe like 2 or 3 calls. And those were like, we did a few days over at Disney proofreading music and something else, just really nothing to make a living on for that entire first year.
So you think that the first year is because you have to get kind of into the system and kind of get your name plugged in? Is that you think the philosophy is that?
Part of it. It's also partly because there's so many people coming to Los Angeles all the time.
Yeah.
That when you talk to people, it's not most of the jobs in our business aren't formal interview jobs with a corporate HR department, where they review your resume. They're kind of just feeling you out. Mm-hmm. And there's so many people who they'll look at, and if you've just arrived in town, sometimes they'll kind of take the attitude of, well, let's see if they stick around.
Right. Are they in this? Are they committed?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And also, and it's also a little bit of, well, let's see if they can hack it out for a year. Because usually the jobs people are going to call you for aren't full-time jobs. Yeah. It's, hey, we have a project that's going to last for a month or something like that. And, so you're going to bounce around. And also it's a little bit of just getting yourself known. Mm-hmm. Once you've kind of been around a little bit, then suddenly you become a little bit more of, if you've been talking to people, you've been doing little bits of things here and there, then suddenly it's, oh yeah, I think I've heard that name. That person actually is working in town. And that
you kind of get specialized too as well. Like this is what you kind of do, or no, that doesn't really go.
I don't know if you can really do that some people do that in a year. I don't think I really did, but wasn't doing much. I can remember I went into one meeting and this guy was kind of a jerk, but he asked me, well, what have you done? And I said, well, for the last 2 years, I've been working on the Lord of the Rings films, and we just got the Oscar for best soundtrack, blah, 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 blah. And he just cut me off right there. No. What have you done here?
Oh, wow.
I got off a plane.
Sat in my apartment for a while and pondered things.
I came and met people like you. I kind of want to say, what the hell do you expect?
Wow.
But yeah, you do run into those kinds of people as well.
He probably wanted to see if you were going to BS him or, you know what I mean, or something. So I'm pretty sure.
No, this guy was just kind of a jerk.
Oh, okay. Okay, he was just legit.
Yeah. There are a few people like that.
Right. Yeah.
So then my wife, Danita, actually got a job working for a place called Bill Hughes Music Service, which was a music copy house and a music contracting company. And it was a small place, and they started working on – they were just at that point starting up on a new show called American Idol at that point.
Oh, yes.
They did the first season or 2 of that, and then Dancing with the Stars came along. Mm-hmm. And so she was working full-time almost full-time as a copyist over there. Everybody's freelance.
Yeah.
And they needed some extra help with proofreading and things. So she said, well, my husband can do this. And then I started working there. And it was while I was working on Dancing with the Stars – Harold Wheeler he was the music director at the time, and he was doing almost all the arranging himself. I think just Tom Rainier was the other guy who was doing a little bit. And so it was just getting crazy. There was so much music on that show, and we had 2 episodes a week. So it was killing him. It was literally just killing him. So he was asking Danita if, she knew of any other arrangers that, that knew the style, and because there was a particular style at that time for the show and a way of writing and things. And she says, well, Jason's been sitting here proofreading this show for the last, 3 years or whatever. And so Harold gave me a shot, and, I was able just to do it without any explanation because I knew the show so well by that point, and had the background. So that was how I started. Arranging on Dancing with the Stars and doing arrangements for that show.
You've had a lot of lucky breaks. Seems like that first year must have been tough, but Lord of the Rings, and then American Idol. So it sounds good.
And that's a big part of it. I mean, there are more people who want to do this work than there are jobs.
Right.
That's just, and that dominates every part of the work that you do. Yeah. And so a lot of it is, lucky breaks at points, but then you have to have the ability to capitalize on those breaks when they pop up.
Right.
And that's what's really important, is being able to, when something is needed and you step up, being able to really deliver and being able to be somebody that people can work with and who can really just hit the ground running right out of the gates.
Yeah. That's what I'm finding too. Like, I'm freelancing right now as my day job is instructional designer. That's what I went to college for. And so music is kind of like, a hobby until, my backup plan is first besides the music thing. So,
well, we don't always have the luxury of making that choice.
Right. But one thing when I've talked with all these composers, the people that do professionally, the thing I'm getting is make sure you have your hands in multiple things. You're not going to make it just doing this one thing. Some people do, some people are lucky, but make sure you have multiple buckets, and if you are a composer, do trailer, do library music, but you might have to have a part-time job doing something else. And so that's my mentality is I'm trying to do. And what you said about the freelancing thing is what I'm finding out. You'll get that 12th hour call or email. Now it's email, can you do this project? And you're just like, yeah. And they needed a really quick turnaround. So once you deliver that, and they can trust you, you're going to see work just kind of fly, because they're like, okay, he can do it, he's fine. So that's what I've been finding out, and I think it's probably no different. There's
always those trial by fire moments too.
Right.
And I mean, and I think there's another thing that I've always kind of subscribed to, and that's not being afraid to charge accordingly. If somebody comes in at the last minute and this thing is going to require me to stay up all night, well, you're going to pay for that.
Right.
I mean, I'll hit the mark for you, and I'll bust my tail and make sure that it's done. But that's not going to be the same as if you gave me a week lead time on this thing. You're going to pay for that extra service, because it takes a toll on you physically.
It does.
And it's killed people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you're saying this, because I don't think a lot of composers talk about this. Composition is one of those fine lines for just in music in general. It's like we always want to undervalue what we do, but like you said, it could kill you, and it does. It does kill people. Work.
Yeah. I mean, one of the ones that always pops into my mind is Oliver Nelson, famous jazz sax player and arranger and things, and he came out to Hollywood, and he was doing shows like The $6 Million Man in the 70s and things like that. And he became known as the go-to guy. If the chips were down and everybody's backs were against the wall, who could you turn to? Oliver Nelson. He would get it done overnight, whatever. No hurdle was too great. It would be on the stand for the session the next day or whatever, and he would do it. And Oliver Nelson died at his desk pulling an all-nighter.
Wow.
A lot of people don't know that about him. A guy that I used to work for was a pallbearer at his funeral, and worked with him a lot, and it literally killed him. And I know other people who, because of that schedule and things, I mean, I know people who've had heart attacks, who've had other things, where it almost killed them as a result.
It's one of those things. It's a trap, you fall into, because, you need to do the work. You want to do great, and this is your living, this is your livelihood. So, I mean, but, your health is all you have, your health and your family, usually. Without that, what do you got? Yeah, you can make more and more and more money, but I think a lot of people fall into that trap, especially when we're younger, even when you get older too. You just want to work, but you gotta step away, and you gotta enjoy life too, because life experiences will, what I'm finding is, will help your music and help your creativity, and you can bring those, to your music.
Yeah. That thing of having something outside of your music to draw on for creativity. Yeah. Oh, it is so important. I mean, you run into that in Los Angeles a lot of times. You go to these places, an NSCL meeting or something like that, and you run into these hordes of people who all they can talk about, literally the only thing they can talk about is sample libraries and the latest software and how did John Williams do this, and did you see the video of, you know, so-and-so's session or something like that. And you just,
but they can't write a bar of music.
You know, just get me out of here.
Yeah, and they can't write a bar of music, right? They say they probably could, but you know,
some of these people can really write. Yeah, they really are very, very talented. They're very skilled in things. Sometimes they have trouble finding work because, I mean, aside from the fact that there's the luck of the draw, but sometimes people meet them and just go, oh my gosh, I do not want to have to spend 6 months talking to this person. They're boring. They don't have a life outside of this.
Right. Yeah. Relationships is key. I think it's like who you know, how you know them. And if you don't always talk about music or the job, talk about other things, because then you build a connection. And I'm finding that too. And I've heard that a lot of, you know, people talk about that too. It's like, you know, if you want to get a job, find them and don't talk about music, talk about life. And, you know, you probably get the job, build a relationship. But, you know, that's, you know, not always the case.
I mean, the idea behind that is really true, that we have to be human beings. You know, we don't make music just to make music. I mean, music is a way we communicate with each other. Music is a way we share the human experience. Music is a way that people come together around a common shared experience, or come together to create something that is bigger than just themselves.
Right. Exactly.
And it's not just, I mean, that's one of the big disconnects that I think we have today with everyone working in front of their computers, is that you are completely disconnected from both your audience and from anyone else in the process of making the music.
Exactly. I feel so strongly about this. I mean, I'm 36, so I remember before the internet, before the computer, you know, like I come from a rock background, you know, you see my guitars over here. I'm a guitar player. And I've lost that, like playing with people, you know, getting in a room and just hammering something out, you know. There's something about that. And I actually went about 2 months ago, I went and saw John Williams here in Cleveland. He came in for a night, and it was epiphany. A lot of things happened for me, because I haven't been to an orchestra since college. I used to go all the time. I'd go for free, you know, and watch the college orchestra. It was amazing. And like, I haven't been to one in so long, and I was just sitting there, and me being, you know, a composer kind of thing, and sample libraries and all this stuff. And it's like, wow, we really are missing a lot, you know, like with trying to compose with sample libraries, just to hear a real orchestra and how people play off each other. And I'm
the
from
excitement and the energy of that.
Yes.
I mean, that's what it's
you
not
can't
just
replicate
about the
that
sound. It's about this feeling that we all get, this, and that we all share when we're in that room at the same time, and the performers feel it too. It's just a wonderful experience.
And I strongly agree with that. Like, composing on a computer, obviously there's great people that make great mock-ups and it sounds pretty, but for me, it's like, there's still something missing, you know, there's just something about it. You can, like, for us people, I can always hear, especially when you hear, like, I'm a guitar player, so I know when it's a fake guitar. I just, I can hear it, or it's not an amp. It's not if they're using digital, I can hear it in a second. I just know. And, but you know, our audience, like you talked about, most of them, 95% can't tell the difference. You know,
but I think
they feel a difference.
A danger too. Yes, and you can put, you know, two pieces of music in front of an audience, you know, or you could even put it into a film or something where it lessens the impact of it a bit, but it's still important depending on how it's used. And they may not be musically literate enough to say, I like piece A better than piece B because of blah 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 blah.
Right.
What they can do is go, well, I don't know why, but I like this one better. And a lot of times, and this is such a complicated thing to do, because you have to assume that all things between these two pieces are exactly equal, which they never are. You know, every performance is different. Everything is a little subtly different. But if all things are equal, it's been my experience that people will generate to the sound that has more life in it. Given that it's appropriate for the situation. And one of the things we overlook is the fact that when we have live instruments playing, the sound is so much more complex. There are so many more variations in the sound. It's always changing. It's never static. And
The
even
nuances,
the sound itself,
all the little
right,
nuances.
the nuances are there,
Yeah.
and even the sound itself.
Yeah.
You know, like whether it be a cello or an electric guitar or anything,
Right.
the sound itself is much more complex because you have the interactions of the instrument and the humidity in the room and all these other things, and then you just have a player who is manipulating it constantly. I mean, just there's all kinds of subtle things that are changing in the sound that we never hear, and that complexity is what gives it a lot of the interest and what motivates people to listen to it. You know, it's just because it's something truly unique. It's really exciting.
And every player is different. They hit like percussionists, you know, everybody hits the drums differently. They hold the stick differently. Guitar, like the guitar, string instruments in general are just so, you know, fine detail, and like it's hard to replicate every little thing, because like if I hit a string just like this or like that, or it sounds different. Every guitar player, every violinist, celloist, everybody plays it differently, and that makes it so unique and special, and you can't replicate that with samples. You just can't.
No, you just can't.
You can't.
There's no way. I mean, maybe someday there will be the technology to do it, but right now, no. I'm just from that school of thought. You can't replicate a person. You just can't. And like now the big thing is AI creating its own music, and you listen to that, you're just like, yeah, it's all, you know, musically correct. It's technically wonderful.
Yeah, it's so great. Look at the chord progressions. Look what they're doing. But I'm not feeling it. Like there's something missing, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, and you know, sometimes, I mean, yeah, and there's been those AIs that have actually won composition competitions.
You're right.
That, you know, where they've submitted pieces and they've looked at the score and won, and that's fine. Okay, fine. It fooled, you know, a panel of judges.
Right.
And you know, sadly, if there's one place where that probably will supplant human beings, it very likely is in underscore and library music and things like that. I mean, because in a way, that's kind of the bottom of the barrel for musical expression. I mean, and it works. I hate to say that because I don't want to disparage the people who are writing wonderful music in those genres.
Yeah.
But you have to look at what the clients want, unfortunately.
Most of the time they want to save money and they just want something. I just want something to put here. I don't really care, you know, as long as it works.
As long as it has this particular mood or this color or vibe or something like that.
I could see that. I definitely see that in maybe the next 10 years. You know what I mean? Like AI being more the television world kind of thing. So yeah, I definitely get that.
But in a larger sense, you know, it begs the question of why. Why are we, you know, what is the purpose of creating this? And we may have a purpose for it, you know, in places like, you know, underscore in a TV commercial or interstitials or things like that. But as far as concert music, what are we listening to? Why is this interesting to me? I mean, maybe there is some just beauty in the algorithm. Okay. And that may be something that may be delightful for us to partake just because it hits certain receptors in our brain that create, you know, we take drugs for the same reason. Very often. I mean, whether they be prescription drugs or something, you know, illicit on the streets. But yeah, I mean, we kind of, it opens up some really big questions about why do we create art?
Right.
And why do we do these incredibly complex processes like painting and creating music or writing literature or something? I mean,
self-expression. I mean, it's expressing, it's basically taking your environment, you know, you're living through life and you're taking these experiences and then you're bringing them out how they kind of affect you. You know, I guess that's the best way I could put it. I mean, I don't know.
Sorry, just 1 second.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Thank you. Danita just brought me a cup of water because I forgot to bring one in here.
Nice. Yeah, I need one of those. But yeah, no, I mean, your perspective is awesome because you've been around the industry, you know, down in LA, which I have no clue. I'm green as can be, so I love talking about it in here. Well, you know what I mean? Like I hear stories.
Well, LA's a different world.
Right,
I mean,
right. I used to live in Orlando.
The music business.
I guess I used to live in Orlando, Florida, and like that's the only thing I could think of is LA is maybe a little similar because it's very transient. People are coming and going so much, but not the same. You know, I mean, I could totally, it's probably completely different, but that's the only thing I could relate to it. So how have you seen it change since you started your career till now? I mean, is it, you know, scary or is it like, it's just.
Oh yeah, it's scary. And you know, not that it never
was right.
It wasn't scary.
Right.
It's a very volatile industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing one of the big things we're seeing now. I mean, I kind of came in when synthesizers and samplers had really just made a big, I shouldn't say since, when sampling had really just made a big impact on the scene. You know, the
early
late
2000s,
90s,
right?
Yeah, early 2000s was really when there was this big shift. I mean, everybody had their Giga Studios, but then suddenly everything started to get smaller and cheaper and better. And the tools we have at our disposal now are just ludicrous.
It's mind blowing.
I mean, they're not everything we want them to be, but they're amazing.
I would have killed for what I have today back when I was, you know, in the mid 90s when I was just getting started. Oh, yeah. This would have cost a fortune.
I mean, when I first started getting into the business, everybody was dumping their racks of Roland S760s and getting Giga Studios. You know, it was kind of right at that point when everybody was dumping all that stuff and putting everything in Giga Studio. And now give people Tascam is, you know, bought up Giga Studio and it's gone.
Right. Yeah. It's just crazy, like how far we've come in just 20 years. You know, it's insane. It's great. It's awesome, but you know, there's always something that comes from it that's not so good.
Yeah.
You know,
I think the big thing that's happening now that's really affecting both the composing world and the performers and anybody who works in media music is online streaming.
Yeah.
Because that is upending from a business point of view, from an audience point of view. The entire way we think about how we earn money in this business.
Right. They don't pay very well, from what I've heard.
No. Well, and that's become a real issue because for years, I mean, let's face it, composers, other than at the very top end, have been looking for ways to undercut themselves for years in order to make their clients happy.
Right.
And you hit a point where you're suddenly hitting a floor where you just can't cut anymore. And so they start looking. I mean, this was part of what I think was a big part of what motivated the recent push by some agents in LA to try to get the musicians union to agree to just an across-the-board buyout with no strings attached or anything else. The composers had given away everything in their package that they could. Wow. And now it was like, well, where else can we squeeze? The only people left were the people downline from them, which were the musicians. Well, now the problem is, all the darn musicians, they're asking for too much money and they're killing our business. It's like, no, that's not exactly right. I mean, when you really looked at everything that was going on, it was a bunch of hogwash.
Yeah.
But with the advent of streaming now, for a long time, you've had this model where composers will say, okay, I won't take a big fee up front because if this, for example, is going to go on network television and I know it's going to be broadcast prime time, I can take less money up front because I know I'm going to make a huge amount of money on the royalties from this.
Yeah.
Or, you know, the residual stream from other usage or something like that. Now when things are being streamed, that model gets completely upended because the problem is the streaming folks are saying, well, we can pay composers up front this paltry little fee, and they always take it for TV, but there's no secondary stream of income from that because once it goes online, it's worldwide. So no foreign, I shouldn't say none, but a lot of foreign networks and things, they don't want to pay for a show and put it on their network when it's already on a streaming service in their country.
Yeah.
And that used to be a huge part of the market. You know, you'd have all these worldwide royalties coming in, you'd have new usage in this place. Whereas now when you pay for like a Netflix show or something like that, there's a lump sum of money up front that basically includes a worldwide distribution and a license for, say, 8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
That thing's which is your prime window for exhibition and where you're going to make your most royalty money. Well, that's just off the table now, and all you're left with is this little bit of money up front that has been dwindled down. Yeah. So now it's forcing people to completely rethink compensation packages.
Wow. Yeah, it's very interesting. We live in a just besides for music, just in general, everything's changing. You know, from like I said, I'm 36 and I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember before the internet really took a hold and changed our life. I mean, it's changed our life. Yeah. I think about 2006 is when it really started to kind of show itself because that's when YouTube came out and you know, I mean, just think about that. YouTube came out in 2006. That wasn't that long ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, and in our phones.
I'm sitting here thinking back to working for a .com consulting company and 2001.
Yeah.
Before the big crash and everything.
And it's changed so much. I mean, I remember being online and I remember being in high school and college, like they wouldn't want us to use references from online. Like those aren't real. Now it's like you can't get away from that. It's like everything is online. So it's great because it's democratized musicians. And now, hey, if you're good at what you do, you can build an audience. But like you said, there's consequences to this because now there's more competition. Now everybody can do what you do because everybody has the tools. And you know, and
whether they know how to use them or not is a whole nother.
That's a whole nother
Well, but on the flip side of that, everybody has the tools. There's just more competition. Now, if you throw your music online, you're not just competing with everybody else who does what you do. You're competing with the Beatles. You're competing with Jerry Goldsmith. You're competing with,
everyone.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra, with whoever else has their recordings out there, because it's all on this. It's just all there for people right at their fingertips. And why are they going to pick your music over something else?
Right, and that's a lot of thing I don't think a lot of composers think about is like once you put it out there, it doesn't matter if you're professional or not. Everybody's going to judge you as a professional. They're going to compare you to everybody, and that's the thing I don't think a lot of us think about. You're on their level now, and because if you put it on Spotify or you're putting it on iTunes, well, you're right up against John Williams, like you said, Jerry Goldsmith. It's like, why would I choose yours over there? So yeah, it's crazy. I mean, on the flip side of that can be paralyzingly terrifying. I mean, it's because you can really get wrapped up in, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be as good as, or why would somebody value my work on the same level as somebody else? Right. But on the other hand, that shouldn't stop us. I mean, because this isn't a big competition. I mean, unfortunately, we live in a culture that is a capitalist culture where we measure everything by the amount of dollars it generates. Or followers I have, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, but the followers are really only of value to people if either A, it strokes your ego, or B, you can turn that into some sort of a revenue stream. Those are like the only two ways that we measure anything in our culture these days, which is problematic. I mean, that could be a whole nother discussion about politics and everything else.
Right.
But it forgets the impetus for creating in the first place. Which is, again, a way to communicate with other human beings, a way to share an experience. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't become interested in music, and I didn't become a musician because I wanted to make money.
Right. Exactly. I mean, me either.
That's not to diminish it. That's kind of the real dichotomy that we face, is that we have to make money from what we do, but at the same time, the money itself wasn't the only impetus to do it.
Yeah,
I guess that's true in other trades too. I mean,
yeah, but music is one of those weird things because you get that thing of commerce. It's like, I'm an artist, and then people get mad at you because like you want to make money. He's like, but everybody's got to make a living. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're doing it just for the money, like you're putting out songs just to create money, then yeah, that's a problem. But yeah, like you said, I remember when I first started playing guitar, I would spend hours doing it, not ever thinking about, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I mean, of course, back in the mind, I was like, I want to do this for a living.
Of course.
But you still did it. You weren't getting paid to do it. And it's similar with YouTube creators right now, because nobody's making money. I mean, well, there's people making money, but they
they're a very small minority.
Yeah, and they've stripped out because it used to be everybody could make money, with Google AdSense, and now they ripped that apart. And it's like, but still because I create content, and it's like, I just do it for fun. And if it takes me somewhere, great, because you don't know what opportunities are going to open up. So yeah, I totally see that. But yeah, I remember doing it just for fun, and getting with a bunch of guys in a room and jamming out, creating music and having fun,
Yeah. It's like going back to why did the first human being ever make music? Who was the first person who was banging one rock on another and going, hey, this feels good. This is pretty cool, or that's beating on a log or something.
I think we don't think about that a lot. Why am I doing this? Why am I being creative? And why am I creating this music? I think we get hung up on that. Well, I want to get famous, and I want to make money and millions, and that's another thing about my channel. That's what I try to bring that curtain and go, you don't have to be famous. You don't have to, to make a living doing this. There's many people out there doing this, and they're not even, you don't even I don't know who you were. A lot of the people I interview, I don't know who they are, but then once I talk to them and I find out what they do, I learn so much, and it's awesome. It's great.
And that's it's tough because it is, unfortunately, the way our whole culture is structured. There is a conflict there, and we all have to resolve it for ourselves. I mean, I know when I was younger and I was in college and going into music, no one in my family has a musical background.
Same here.
My family is construction workers and steel erectors and farmers.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of consternation about, what's Jason doing? I can remember coming back from college once, and my uncle and aunt took me out to dinner because we hadn't seen each other for a while. We went out to dinner, and halfway through dinner, my dad's side of the family all grew up on a farm, and he says, "Hey, I was over at the farm talking to Grandpa," and he turned to me and he said, "Jason's studying music. How's that a job? How's he going to make a living doing that?" He says, "So I'm asking you." I didn't have an answer for him. "How are you going to make a living? Are you going to be spinning records at a radio station? What are you going to do?" And so from a very young age, I had to actually have an answer to that question. I had to say, and it wasn't just about how are you going to make a living?
Right.
It was, what is the purpose of this? Why are you doing this? What is this? You're putting so much of your life into making noises that other people listen to.
That's not a job. Well, you're from Illinois. I'm from Illinois, so I get it. I get it.
It's a good Midwestern.
It's that Midwestern
you earn
thing.
a living, you work hard, everybody takes care of themselves, and
it's the way it is.
You have to be a productive member of society.
Yeah. What's this art thing you want to do? No, that's not real. It's not even a job. Go get a job.
Right.
Right. I heard the same
very
thing.
often seen as a waste of time. It's something that's frivolous. It's not. You're not working the land. You're not creating something tangible.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, and even if you are creating something, as you know, in various parts of the Midwest, you show them, modern sculpture, and they look at it and say, "What's it for?"
Yeah, they don't understand what took to do that. The amount of work and creativity. It's just like,
or
that's
they
not
don't
real.
Stop and ask themselves, how does this make me feel? What do I think when I look at this? Kind of, and sometimes they do just on a visceral level, but they don't cognitively acknowledge that is what is happening, because they're not trained to think that way.
Exactly. I mean, you're from the Midwest, I'm from the Midwest, especially for where we're from. I don't think we put a lot of emphasis on art. I mean, it's ripped out of schools. No, I mean, I remember when I first started elementary school, we had music class. And then I think by second grade, it was gone. So that would have been like late 80s, early 90s probably. And that's when they started ripping it out of, So the appreciation for music and being a musician and a composer, just from where I'm from and what is so similar to yours, it's like, get a job. That's why, go to college or, go in the military or whatever, that's just how it was. And so that's why I battled that as a younger person, still battle to this day. It's like, this isn't legit, but I'm here to tell you it is legit. And like you said, you can do it. And, but there's a lot of, effort that we put forth to make it happen, but it is possible. Yeah. It is possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think that my parents really, my dad, who has supported me from the get-go. He has been just wonderful with me from the time I was very young, but never fully understood it.
Yes, exactly.
He just saw that I was doing well with it and said, well, if this is what, he's a smart guy, and if this is what he wants to do, he'll find a way to make it work. And so he supported me. I think there were 2 points when he finally started to reconcile this idea with himself. And I think the first was when he came to visit me while I was out at Berkeley. And I had several gigs. I was doing a lot of gigging outside of school in jazz clubs and things like that. And he came out to a couple gigs and watched me perform, and then, hung out with me backstage with some of the other performers and things, and got to talk to the other people. And somebody at one point said, he's actually really good at what he does. And just having that validation from a third party was just mind blowing to him. And then being able to see how an audience react to what my performances and things like that. And when I was part of a trio or a quartet or something. And I think the other one was when I took him to see Lord of the Rings: Two Towers. Went back to, they had moved down to Sandwich, Illinois at that point. We went to this little theater in Sandwich to see it because, hey, my son has worked on this big movie and things. And when the credits rolled and when my name came across the screen, he jumped out of his chair and cheered, and everyone in the theater turns around and looks because here we are at Sandwich and who cares? And this was a movie that just getting him to go see it. Yeah. He didn't care about wizards and elves. Yeah. And I remember the point I said to him, I said, well, there's basically big dinosaurs in it at one point. And he's like, oh, okay. Because there's that scene where the Nazguls come
Yeah.
He'll find that cool at least. And, and it's a big visual spectacle and stuff. But it was suddenly at that point,
it validated.
My son did something tangible. There's something real about this. I can go into a theater, he can see this big movie, and his name is on it.
It's legit. No, I totally understand what you're saying, because that's how I like I said, I'm from Illinois too, and That's true. That's how it is in the Midwest. It's like, it's not that music isn't respected, because people listen to music and people appreciate it. It's just not considered, what's the word I'm looking for? A reasonable living, I guess you could say. Because everybody has that notion that, oh, you're going to be a starving artist. You're just going to, you know what I mean? You're not going to do anything, and you're going to be on the street playing your instrument, you know, and that's a possibility. But, you know, there, if you work hard,
very
and
real possibility.
it's a very real. But I mean, that shouldn't stop you from trying. You know, at least you tried. But have a backup plan.
yeah. And it's not that people are stupid or they're ignorant or anything like that. It's there's this cultural idea based around pragmatism. Because, you know, these are people who, let's face it, the Midwest was a bunch of farmers and factory workers, you know.
Exactly.
And a lot of them were people from Northern Europe who were machinists and tradespeople, you know, who came to the Midwest. And for them, a job was something where you either worked the land or you produced a good. You know, so the idea of a service economy just didn't fit into because there wasn't that type of an economy there.
Exactly. And people that were musicians were the ones living on the streets, or they were bohemians, and you know what I mean? So that's the thing that they get. Yeah. It
was kind of weird, screwy people who, you know, smelled funny and everything else.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And if you weren't, well, and then there was the fact that, you know, back when, you know, in the 1800s and before in the Midwest, which when you think about it, you know, like our grandparents, their parents lived in the 1800s. They were, if you didn't work hard, you didn't survive.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, winters are hell there. You got to prepare for the winter.
Chop wood. And
there wasn't time for making music most of the time, unless that was something you did if you were really wealthy. Or
they did at night, you know, after dinner or something. You know, maybe they had a piano.
It was a distraction.
Yeah.
That's all it was. It was to take your mind off the day. It was like just, I mean, at least if you read a book, you were developing some knowledge or something that might be useful down the road.
Exactly. Yeah, nobody considers music. It's a fine line. I mean, I know. Like I said, I'm from Illinois. I get it. Yeah. You don't have to tell me, because I know. I lived it and breathed it. When normally when you tell someone, yeah, I'm a musician, they look at you. Oh, okay. So what do you do for a living? You know?
Oh, yeah.
Right. You know, so how do you make money? It's like, you know, I mean, I make a little bit from music, but like I said, it's more of a hobby right now that trying to get, you know, to do it. But if it stays a hobby, that's fine with me. But, you know.
Well, and I know a lot of people in the music and the audio business who their spouse has something that they do completely outside the industry that they really rely on for a good chunk of their income. And between the two of them, they do all right. But if you were to take one away, their lives would be completely different.
Exactly.
My wife and I Danita and I have just been incredibly fortunate that we both work in this industry, and we have managed to carve out a decent living and buy a house and you know, we've had to make sacrifices as a result. I mean, gosh, when we moved to New York City, our grocery budget was $25 a week.
Yeah. I was there once when I lived in Chicago. I got out of college. I was making $30,000 a year. So this would have been about 2007, which, as you know, being from the suburbs, $30,000 ain't a lot of money. No. Mine was like $50 for 2 weeks. So it was similar to yours for single, but I mean, it was rough times, man. And, I only imagine what New York would be even worse than Chicago, probably. Yeah.
Although, I mean, New York has changed now. I mean, I was there from like 1999 till about 2003 or 4.
Right.
And New York was a great city to be poor in. You could always find something to do. I mean, you could always just go out and go for a walk and find something, or hop on the subway. You know, you bought your monthly pass and you had transportation. You didn't have to worry about your car or anything like that. I mean,
I've never been to New York. It's on my list, so it's
a neat place to visit. It's another place that is completely different from anywhere else in the world.
Right.
I mean, the island of Manhattan is basically a big anthill.
Wow.
It's a whole bunch of people from around the world all smashed onto this one small island trying to figure out how to live together.
Wow, that's crazy.
Developed its very own culture.
Being from the Midwest, it like scares me because, you know, we're used to open, you know, fields and cornfields. And it's like, Chicago's a big city. Yeah. But, you know, it's nothing compared to like New York. And I finally realized I was a Midwesterner when I moved to Orlando.
when I moved to Florida, I finally got what being a Midwesterner was. Because, like, you know, when you live in that, you know, because I live in Ohio now, and I've only lived in Illinois and Ohio for most of my life. And it's like you're still around the similar people and the similar cultural values and stuff until you move out of that. Because I was in the South, which Orlando's not really the South, but to me, it's the South because, you know, it's not the Midwest. I was like, wow, I get it now.
The South with gators.
Yeah, I get it. Like, I totally understand what being a Midwesterner is. Because, like, everybody said I had an accent. I was like, I don't have an accent. I talk like everybody else, you know?
I don't have an accent. I'm from Chicago.
Yeah. I say roof. And they're like, that's what a dog says. And it's like, no, that's how we say it up there. And I call it pop and, you know, all that stuff.
Right.
So.
Oh, pop, yes.
Yeah. No, it's soda.
And bratwurst.
Yeah, brat. But yeah, Chicago has it. I mean, I have like
Chicago has its own
accent. Yeah, I kind of have the Wisconsin. I don't know. Like, I have the mixture, but I do know what people from Chicago.
I know the accent you're talking about. That kind of northwestern Illinois, Wisconsin, kind of northeastern Iowa,
right?
Little bit of southeastern Minnesota.
Exactly. Yeah, I have a little of that.
Not that hard Minnesota,
no.
South Dakota accent that you get when you go farther
north.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, this kind of accent where it all sounds like they're a little bit Swedish or something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they sound like Canadian kind of. Yeah, it's a mixture of Canadian. Yeah, I heard that one. Minnesota, that's a great great state, man. I've been there a few times. Very beautiful. But yeah, so the whole getting out of your experience and just like
that actually brings up a really good point creatively too, is that we usually don't understand our own culture until we step outside of it and get a chance to view it through someone else's eyes.
Yes.
You know, and that's why sometimes the people who are the best at describing our own culture are the people who aren't part of it. One of the things that I found that was really that I didn't realize for years was probably an impact on my creative self was the storytelling culture in the Midwest.
Yes.
And I don't know if your family had this, but my family, it was we get together at Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever, and the men would invariably go into the kitchen and Grandpa would pour everybody a shot and they'd have a beer and they'd start trading stories.
Oh, yeah.
And the stories would usually be something about work or some big boxer they knew or something like that. You know, the typical Midwestern stories.
Oh, yeah.
Know, the hard days in the cold on the farm or the days in the factory when some machine broke and killed somebody or something.
Yeah, back in my day, you don't understand what it was like. Yeah.
Well, there was that, but it was also the spectacle kind of stories, the ones where there's something really funny happened, and they would tell these same stories sometimes over and over again, and every year they would get exaggerated a little bit, and they would get a little bit bigger and a little bit funnier and a little bit. And there was this whole culture around it. And I had never realized that until I started reading some short stories by I forgot who the author was. I'll have to go look it up. And they were all told in this exact tone of the Midwestern storytelling. Yeah. Very often they had something about baseball, which was everybody played baseball in the Midwest and things. But there was a way that people spoke. There was a way they told the stories where they built to the climax and their voices got louder and higher and everybody would start laughing and kind of joining in. And you see it in I've kind of come across it also in different African-American cultures, sometimes from the Midwest, sometimes from the Southeast. There's some similarities to that. But I've also noticed that when I write music or structure an arrangement or sometimes I never thought about this until years later, but I kind of use some of that shape and that way of telling a story and constructing something and always thinking about how the listener is going to respond to this and how do I get you, the listener, to be a part of this enjoyment with me, you know, so that we share something together.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I think just talking about the Midwest, like if you've noticed, a lot of film directors, authors come from the Midwest because we have nothing to do. You know, we just like, especially during winter, like you said, it's brutal. And it is brutal when it's like 30 below zero. You ain't going outside. And so you have a lot of
sometimes we still go outside and play ice hockey, but you know,
I mean, I don't know about you. Like I dreamt of moving to California. Like I don't want to live here in Illinois. It's like cornfields and flat land and winter. That's basically
when I was growing up, everybody wanted to go to either Florida or Arizona, it seemed like. Everybody's going to move to Florida.
Yeah.
But somewhere warm.
Yeah, somewhere warm, and it's like because there's nothing in the Midwest. There's nothing to do. And where I'm from, in Moline, there was hardly anything to do.
No, you're right. There's not that much to do.
And like we didn't have. I mean, you live close to Chicago, so I mean, there's stuff to do in Chicago. But where I'm from, it's not a small town. Like everybody thinks, like when you're from Illinois, it's like, oh, you're from Chicago. No, oh, so you grew up on a farm? No, I didn't. I grew up in a city. We had water. All this stuff, and I grew up in Moline.
Look, man, we're farther up the river than Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like we had gangs and violence and all this in my town, and so I'm from Moline, Illinois, and like it wasn't until I was like in my probably high school years that finally concerts started coming, like big name bands. I didn't have to go to Chicago to go see these things, and because we got a Civic Center.
Would they just come to the Quad Cities general?
Yeah. The Quad Cities. See, yep, you're from Illinois. No, it's crazy because like when I talk to people from that area and you say the Quad Cities, they're just like, yep, I know what you're talking about. But if I say that down in Florida, I'm from the Quad Cities, huh? So cool. So we got the Civic Center there, and like I got to see Metallica, I got to see Kiss, and all these bands, but growing up, it was just like there was nothing, and so and that's why a lot of us would get in trouble. You'd find other things you probably shouldn't be doing.
Let's go break something.
Yeah, put something on fire, chop a tree, all this crazy stuff we would do as kids. But yeah, I think that fuels a lot of people in the Midwest, their creativity, because you kind of have to do that or you go insane, So, I mean, I think that's why it produces a lot of creative people. I mean, I've just noticed that. If you always look at everybody that's a composer or an actor or a screenwriter, they're always from the Midwest.
There's a large contingent from the Midwest. Yeah, there definitely is.
I just noticed
and I've always had this kind of like little humorous theory whenever I meet somebody from the Midwest that we Midwesterners are going to someday take over the world.
There's a lot of us.
Because we're all hardworking.
Yeah.
And we just kind of put our heads down and go. And we're so polite that nobody will see us coming.
Yeah. I figured that one out, the polite thing, when I moved to Florida. Like I still open doors for people and they just look at me weird. It's just a thing I do. I don't even think about it.
And you say hello to strangers when you're walking down the street, You walk by somebody, you wave and say hello, and they look at you like, who's this creepy guy?
Especially like if you go through a checkout line, the cashier will talk to you. And when you go to like big city, even in Chicago, people will talk to you.
Right.
In a big city like that. I mean, it's, you got to be careful a little bit, but for the most part, people are pretty polite in Chicago. I mean, for the most part, and it's just, you don't know about that until you, like you said, you move away and you actually reflect on it and go, oh, so that's it, like that's what a Midwestern is. But I think that traditional Midwesterner thing that we know of and we grew up with, I think it's kind of changed a little bit. I mean, I think it's kind of, but it's still there. It's still there in its roots. But
I don't really know because I haven't been back to that area for now at least 15 years.
Okay, but like the small rural parts of the Midwest. Time stands still, as you know. You could leave. Like you could. It's one of those things. Like when you go back to your hometown. I just went back to my hometown like last year and I hadn't been there for like 8 years. It's like it changed, but it didn't, it's like it just kind of stands still the time there. And the Midwest is it does that. The Midwest stands still.
And I think that's so important for us to be aware of where we came from and what it was that created us.
Yeah.
As creative people. And we see this musically too. If you don't get outside your musical shell, you have no concept of what you're doing and how it is perceived by the rest of the world. And how it is perceived by people is kind of the whole reason for doing it in the first place. I mean, you want
people
music
to hear
is about people. I mean, music is made by people, it's performed by people, it's listened to by people. If nobody listens to it, it's kind of like, what's the point of doing it?
You want your music to affect people,
Yeah. And I think sometimes we get really tied up, especially when we're stuck behind our computers. And the internet has this way of creating tunnel vision as well. Where we just, it reinforces the things that we already see and doesn't always broaden us in the way that we want.
Yeah.
And so we kind of get tied down into genres. And like, for example, I will see people who will talk about Hans Zimmer as if he's a household name.
Right.
You step outside of the world of people who are kind of film score nuts, and you say the name Hans Zimmer, and they say, who's that? Was he a psychologist from the 1800s or what? They have no idea who this person is.
Right.
Which is why it always is kind of funny to me when people say, that having a particular composer on a film is going to help drive sales. It's like, oh, get real.
I would say John
Zimmer's,
Williams, though. I think John Williams is crossed over.
But the bump that he will give to sales is so small in the realm of what it takes to make a blockbuster film successful that it's, I mean, I should say the name recognition bump that he will give it is so small. I mean, he's like the only person who even registers on the radar.
Yeah.
When you start looking at, because films now are international, especially at the blockbuster level. They have to, and they massage these films to specifically appeal to an international audience,
right?
Because that's where most of the thing people don't realize is a blockbuster film, it releases in the United States. Very often it doesn't start turning a profit until it hits the international market. I mean, they were basically just recouping costs in the United States for a lot of films. And then once the international distribution hits and the ancillary sources of income start coming in on the film, that's where
they make their profit.
They really are. That's where they're actually moving into a profit.
Do you think it's a generational thing?
Getting outside of our bubble.
You have to. I mean, if you stay in your bubble all the time, you're always going to write the same. You're always going to do the same thing until you discover new music. And like that's why I'm always on the prowl to listen to new stuff. Like the stuff I've never even listened to. I listen to pop music, rock music, metal music, jazz, classical, everything. And you don't know what you're going to take away. And I can't read music and I don't write music, so I'm one of those guys, but I try. I'm trying to learn. I've always been by my ear. I've always listened to my ear. I just can hear things and know that if it sounds good or not. But so I'm trying to transcribe. So that's been the best thing I've ever done for myself, because it does so many things. You're training your ear, you're listening. And you know what I mean? Like you're analyzing
and
music.
You're forcing yourself to think critically about what you're hearing as well, which is something we don't do when we listen passively.
Right. You're just enjoying the music. And I remember when I took one semester of music theory in college, and you got to remember, I'm a rock guitar dude taking music theory, college level music theory. I got a D, so did okay.
You passed.
I passed. But it was one semester, and that was rough, man. I mean, I'm sure. But it was a awakening. I learned so much. But like you said, when you're around people, and other musicians, and you're playing, there's just, you can't replicate that. There's just something special about that, and I don't know if we're losing that. I mean, I think we'll always have musicians, but I think it's different. It is different,
Well, and our culture is changing.
Right.
And our arts change to reflect the culture.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, sometimes they drive the culture, but they are, whether the arts change the culture or the culture changes the arts, is kind of a moot point. The point is they're intertwined. Yeah. And so, as we as a people change, our art will naturally change.
It does.
As well.
And that's what we're in right now. We're in a shift right now. Like the film score, like you said, Hans Zimmer. Yeah, he did. He shook it up. He changed it. So you got to give him credit for that. But I think that is only a reflection of what we're same with movies. I mean, look how movies are made today. They're not made like how we watched them. I mean, back in Superman was. Oh my God.
Movie studios aren't the same as what they were when we were children.
Yeah, exactly.
In the late 90s, or actually throughout the 90s, you saw this corporatization of all the movie studios.
That's what
once
changed.
You have, a board of directors at a movie studio that many of whom are from outside the movie industry, the priorities of the company change.
Right.
And you're very often seen, because in a traditional corporate setting, if you're trying to launch a new product, you need to be able to project how much money you're going to be able to make, what your expenses are, and things like that. Well, and how do you do that if it's something completely new? You find something that is similar and try to figure out where the similarities are, and from there build a projection on what this new product or service will do economically. That's really hard to do in the film world, because you're dealing with something creative, and very often the stuff that breaks through and really has a big impact culturally and financially is something that you didn't see coming, because it forces people to look at their own assumptions in new ways. Yeah,
you can't replicate that success,
However, when you have a whole bunch of people on a board who are from a traditional corporate environment, the first thing they're going to say is, well, show me that this is worth the risk. Yeah. Because for them, it's all about, profit and loss. Yep. And so how do you do that? Well, you say, okay, well, it's like this particular project and in this way, but with this twist to it. And so therefore we know that these are the demographics that applies to. This is the kind of ticket sales we can hope to draw from that demographic. With this kind of twist, we add this and that. And so you can empirically somehow or another come up with some sort of a predictor as to what the economic success of a picture is.
Yeah.
The greatest and the easiest one-to-one comparison you can make is a sequel.
Yeah.
This film made X number of dollars for this kind of audience in, this sort of distribution. We can replicate that with a sequel. We can do it exactly the same. We can expect to make X number of dollars in this case. And then plus or minus whatever variables we have attached to it.
And we live in the sequel world. That's what we live in right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of the reason why. And that's why, they're putting out fewer films that make more money. And they aren't particularly the most original things. Very often they're not original at all.
They're not.
Just a rehash of a previously
successful
previous product
film
that sold well.
Yep. I've noticed that because recently I like films. I love watching films. Like that's how I kind of got into the film music thing. I've always loved movies. It's been my thing. And I go back sometimes and I watch these older movies from the 60s, 70s. I watch Chinatown, and Jerry Goldsmith's score.
Favorite films.
Yeah, and it's just like we've lost storytelling in that way. It's changed.
Right.
It's changed so much. And like those movies, and especially if you go and watch the movies that we grew up with, the 80s, like the Amblin films, like, Steven Spielberg and, all those.
Yeah, they have a very clear tone to them, a very particular style to them.
There's a reason why those things are what they are, and because it's telling a story and you're connecting. And now, like, they do the 3-act structure, if you're a film music composer, you need to know that. But now it's like 8, 9 structures. We're telling like 5 different stories in one movie, and it's hard to connect to it. And the characters aren't relatable. And I'd rather have strong characters in a movie. I don't care about all the flash. It's cool, but I
think we also have to be careful though about the way we judge that, because when we go back 20 years, or we go back 100 years, if we're talking about music, or 200 years, we have the luxury of cherry picking things.
Exactly.
And saying this was the great stuff from that period. When we're looking around at the stuff that's here today, we don't know what the great stuff is that's going to stand the test of time.
Good point.
And you go back through any one of those periods. You go back, like, let's say to the 80s.
Oh, there's horrible movies.
They were terrible films in the 80s. It's just awful. They were shoveling them out at that point. Yeah.
The clone movies, like they would do, like Rambo, they'd have like 50,000 different Rambo type movies, and whatever was big, we got to do that.
The number of like Chuck Norris films that were just terrible, that kind of thing. Chuck is dead, so he won't come kick my ass for that.
Exactly, but I totally history has a way of the good stuff floats to the top, and the bad stuff just gets lost, But so I totally get that. In our perspective, we have to.
The joke is always name one composer who is a contemporary of Mozart.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's not like they weren't there.
They were there. There was lots of them, but that's a good point. Yeah, and that's what history is. We're only going to remember the good stuff, and but there was bad stuff. There's always, and that's a good point that you make. And
90% of, and this is a really important thing to keep in mind when we were talking earlier about, how we compare ourselves to the greatest people out there, and how paralyzing that can be. Another way to look at it is that 90% or more of all of the music that is created today will essentially be forgotten 30 years from now.
Exactly.
It's just, and especially now when we're cranking out so much music, it's just so much stuff being created out there. Well over 90% of it isn't even going to matter. And that's fine.
Right.
That's perfectly fine. One of the things that working on a lot of different projects gives you the luxury of doing is having a little bit of perspective, and being able to sometimes say, look, I can remember doing a chart on Dancing with the Stars, and we were agonizing over this or that. And finally, I remember Harold said, it's just not going to matter. Nobody's going to care about this chart. It's one arrangement of a song that people have heard thousands of times. It has to work for this show on this night.
Right.
People are going to watch it as long as it works there, and we made it. We've done our job. We've done a bang-up job on this thing. We're not going to sit here and agonize over every little note in the chart. Of course not. That's ridiculous. Nobody cares.
You got to get over that artist thing. Like, it's got to be. And I talked to my last person I had on. He's a library composer, so he writes for TV stuff and submits to libraries and stuff like that. And he's like, he
really has to generate a volume of content.
Yeah, he's like 300. He does 5 tracks a week and does about 300 to 500 a year. I was like,
Wow.
I don't think I could do that. But and he said something, and it just really struck me. He's like, I don't care if it's good or not. You know what I mean? It's like, I just got to get the track out the door. You know, that's his mentality. He's like, I've never been one of those guys that gets hung up on that. Like, this is great.
Yeah.
You know, I'm writing great music. He's like, he said, I didn't want it to value what I do, but that's the reality. It's like, for me, it's just an output. How many tracks I get out there, get into that library.
It's music. It's music by the pound.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, it's kind of how it is.
Yeah, and it just like that really struck something with me. You know, it's like you just gotta get over that and just write the music. If they love it, great. If not, hey, try again. You know. Right,
and that's something that that I've talked about with Harold Wheeler quite a bit. And I don't know if you know who Harold Wheeler is. He was he's kind of a legend on Broadway.
Okay.
A lot of people, everybody, you say Harold Wheeler on Broadway and everybody knows who he is. And he did a lot of arranging for records and things through the 70s. And Harold, actually, you know the disco Star Wars?
Yeah.
That was Harold Wheeler.
Okay. I'm sure I've heard his work. Like, you know what I mean? It's like the name.
You've heard it.
I've heard of it. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But Harold is an incredibly fast writer. And he still writes using pencil and paper.
Wow.
I mean, I've literally watched this guy write, and what bothers me is just how fast he can move the pencil across the paper. That's just ridiculous. I mean, just physically the ability to write. I mean, sometimes you can barely read it. It's just, it's just a mess. But he's a great writer. And remember, Tom Rainier, who's this great pianist and another arranger, we were talking, and Tom asked Harold, you know, he says, how do you, because Harold writes faster than any of us. He's a freak. And Tom was asking me, how do you write so fast?
Yeah.
Because Tom doesn't write that fast. And Tom's another great writer. And Harold says, you just have to be confident that you're not going to write a bad chart. He says, you can't look back.
Right.
He says, you may write a mediocre chart. He says, you may write a good chart. You may write a great chart, but you're not going to write a bad chart.
Right.
You have to have that confidence to know that, look, what I write is going to be acceptable. And I remember I was talking with him about it, and he says, sometimes, he says, it's not really up to us.
Yeah.
Whether it's great or not. He says, there's those times you write this chart and you think, man, I just nailed it. This thing is just great. He says, and you put it out there and people play it and people listen to it and you hear absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
People, they just kind of shrug.
Nobody likes it.
And then other times you're just fighting just to get it out the door. He says, I'm just, and you hand it out and you think, man, I just kind of phoned that thing in. That's just not a good chart. And people are coming back telling you you're a genius.
Yeah. That's how it is.
And he says, so maybe it's really not up to us.
It's not.
He says, we do the best we can do. Yep. And that's about all we can do.
We're not a judge of our own work. That's what it is. As a creative and as an artist, you can't.
Right. Mike Post put it really well. And there's a guy who has just written a ton of music. And I remember he said that when he works with somebody, when he works with a director, he says his philosophy is, you, the director, you have to love it. He says, if you don't love it, we're not done.
Wow.
He says, but I have to like it. I don't have to love it, but I have to like it. Because if I don't like it, then I've got no quality control.
Right. Wow.
But until you love it, we're going to keep going. And we're going to keep going until you're ready. I mean, now, granted, when you get down to lower levels and things like that, you have to be careful about that because sometimes you end up dealing with directors who just don't know.
Yeah.
They just don't know what they want and things. And at some point you have to say, okay, look, we got to.
Yeah.
I'm gonna help you out here. Saying, stop.
It works. Yeah, no, exactly.
Round and round, and we're already back to square one, and we are reinventing the wheel again.
Yes.
And that's not a good thing.
That's exactly. That's what my philosophy's changed with my work is just don't reinvent the wheel, and just find what works, find what's been out there, and just try to replicate it and put your spin on things. Put what you do, and you just got, like you said, you got to be confident. You got to trust your instincts.
Yeah. And I know in the jazz world, people are always talking about having your own voice and your own sound and things like that. And sometimes young jazz musicians get really wrapped up in this thing of I can't sound like anybody else.
Yeah.
And I remember one of my old teachers, Victor Mendoza, was saying, he says, I didn't invent the phrase, I want a ham sandwich. He says, but that's a very effective phrase to use if I want a ham sandwich.
Right.
But the way that I say that and when I say that and how I say that can be decidedly unique to me.
Exactly. Yep. Nobody's going to play that instrument like you. Nobody's going to, because we all have the same 12 notes.
Right. Exactly.
But how I make those things sound if I write something like we could use the same chord progressions, C, G, whatever, mine's going to sound completely different from how yours sounds because of our experience,
and Western music is a language.
Yeah, it is.
And, you and I are speaking right now within a very strict set of rules for the English language.
Yep.
And those rules are necessary for us to be able to communicate.
Exactly.
But I don't sound like you. You don't sound like me. We convey very different ideas.
Yep.
And that's the beauty of being a human being. And that's exactly what we have in music, too.
Yep. Everybody's unique. Everybody has their own spin. And that's what I'm finding. Yeah, I think as a younger guy or younger woman and man, growing, coming up, you get hung up on that. I think we all do, but
oh yeah, we're all striving to find our place in the world.
But eventually, what you're going to do and what you're going to find, at least my guitar playing, like I've influenced a lot, and sometimes my influences come out. But I take what they do and I do it my own way. But you can hear it, like you're like that sounds like that guy, but it doesn't, so like you make it your own, and eventually it'll be a new trick that you have, and it's good to have a bag full of tricks.
Absolutely. Boy, we all need a vocabulary.
Yeah. And vocabulary, there you said it. A lot of people need to expand that vocabulary, and that you get that through transcribing and listening to different music.
Yeah.
Right, do you think, would you suggest or recommend don't listen to the music that you write? Is that something you kind of do, or do you have to kind of do it a little bit to know what to write? And how do you feel about that?
It depends on how you listen to it, I think.
Okay.
I don't think it's wrong to listen to the music that you write, provided that you either, provided that it doesn't drive you nuts. Because there's some things that you write where you're just like, okay, I'm done, gone. I don't want to think about this anymore. I'm not going to listen to this. There's been some other stuff that I've written over the years where I've come back to it time and again, and I've gone,
you hear it differently. Yeah, you hear it differently.
Yeah, or I just enjoy listening to it.
Yeah,
and a lot of times that's what I'm striving for when I'm writing music or arranging music. Because I guess it's kind of like what Mike said. That's where the quality control comes in. But it's not just that. Yeah. I want to create music that I know will appeal to me.
Right.
Because if I like it, then probably somebody else is going to like it too. If I think it's crap, well, how can I expect somebody else to like it? What? I think this music really sucks, but you might like it because you're just, what does that, well, yeah, you, what am I saying about you?
Right. No, exactly. How do you feel about when you're writing something in a specific genre? Do you listen to that genre to kind of get a feel for it and then like binge on it a little bit and then just, okay, I'm done and I got it?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that, one of the skills that I developed over time was the ability to boil down musical concepts, to their most elemental elements. There's for example, understanding one of the things I found is that every different style of music has its own groove to it, and it has its own harmonic language to it. And being able to understand that underlying groove, that underlying harmonic language, if you can master that, that's what it takes to be able to write authentically within a certain genre.
Yeah, internalize it.
You have to develop that vocabulary. It's like learning a different language. If you can understand the rhythms of the speech, if you can understand the idioms, if you can understand really the mentality behind it. It's when you learn a language, you can learn all the words, you can learn all the phrases and the idioms, but you also have to learn the culture
and context
to a certain extent to understand the context and the way that people speak it. For example, there's a difference between Latin American Spanish and European Spanish. And you can, even if you don't understand the two types of Spanish, you can identify the two types, not because the words are different, because of the way that people speak those languages. And you can often identify different parts, just like the colloquialisms that we talk about from different parts of the United States. Yeah. Those were all reflective of the values and the culture of those different parts of the U.S.
Yeah, it's crazy.
The fact that people from the South speak a bit slower.
Right. We talk faster.
The joke is, you go into a hardware store in New York and say, hey, do you have, 3 penny nails or 3 penny nails, whatever. Yeah. Do you have a screwdriver? And the guy behind the counter will say, yeah, aisle 3 right down there. See it right around. Just go around the corner. It's right there. You'll see it right there. Okay, fine. Yeah. You go into somewhere, south of Atlanta somewhere or in Alabama and say, hey, do you guys have, a Phillips head screwdriver? And somebody will say, yep.
That's true. That's exactly how it is. People up north, we talk fast. We tend to yeah.
What you need a screwdriver for? It's like.
Right.
And the person from New York is going, "Oh my God, just give me the screwdriver."
Where's it at, man? I don't care. I'm not here to conversation with you. Yeah, no, exactly.
You're
That's
not from
true.
here, are you?
Yeah. They want to know you and a little bit about you,
but you're looking at different styles of music.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing is very, very important. A great example would be like, for example, salsa music.
Mm-hmm.
As a percussionist, I tend to be really sensitive to timings and
right.
the way people interpret a beat.
Yep.
And like salsa music, for example, is under the underlying rhythmic element is the clave.
Yep.
Which is going on throughout. And the question is it a 2/3 clave or is it a 3/2 clave? But there's another element of it too. For example, in samba music and bossa nova music, a lot of times they will lay very much on the back side of the beat.
Yeah.
And there's this wonderful thing that, like, for example, great bossa nova melodies have, this Brazilian style where the melody will kind of float. The rhythmic accompaniment will be very locked down. It'll be very much right on the beat, on top of the beat. The melody will really float. Sometimes it'll be a little behind, it'll lean forward, and it pushes and pulls over top of this rock solid rhythmic structure.
Mm-hmm.
And now I don't want to be too dogmatic about that rock solidness because they will push and pull that, but it's a very different way. When you go to something like Cuban salsa music, it's a very rhythmic thing, and they will lean more on the front side of the beat sometimes.
Okay.
And then sometimes, but in certain situations, you want to hit the back side of the beat, and it creates this feel to the music and this push and pull that it transfers over to the way the music is danced.
Mm-hmm.
It is a dance music.
Right.
And it transfers over to the way that people harmonize and where the horn hits land and all that other stuff. So if you can get that kind of a sense in your head of what it means to be a performer of that kind of music, then suddenly you can write authentically. So in answer to your question, do I listen to particular genres of music when trying to write? Absolutely. Because what I want to do is I want to listen to that genre and I'll study it up and down and I'll transcribe parts of it or something like that and really try to get it in my head so that when I go to write, I can push all of that aside.
It just flows.
And write in the language.
Yeah.
I want to be able to speak that language as fluently as possible.
Right. Yeah.
And that goes for any style of music, I think.
Yeah. You kind of have to here's a good question. I don't know how you're going to answer, but like, how do you choose who you listen to? Because we were talking about, 90% is, it might not. Do you go to the people that are masters in that genre, or do you kind of just listen to all of it?
No, that's where I go to start. I mean, is try to find the masters of that particular genre who I like, or maybe sometimes when going through, you'll find sometimes what I'll look out is for somebody who writes very traditionally within a particular style or a particular genre, who may not be the masters, because the masters may be really pushing the limits.
Okay. Yeah.
And that may not be as helpful for a study point of view.
Right.
The people who write very traditionally may be the better ones to study from the beginning, because then they give you the elements that make up the genre and the unique quirks of it that define the sound.
The foundation. They're giving you the foundation of it. Then you could go from there to get
because you really want to push aside all this other stuff and get down to the foundation. What makes this music sound the way it does? What are the elements of it? Is it harmonic? Is it rhythmic? For a lot of pop music, harmony isn't very complex. It's not about that. For certain types of music, it's really just all about the vocal. I mean, like a lot of folk music, for example, whether it be U.S. folk music or Latino folk music or folk music from Eastern Europe or something. For a lot of different folk musics, it's really about the story and the lyrics.
Yeah.
Like blues, for example.
Exactly.
Blues can be a very basic kind of harmonic structure, sometimes a very basic rhythmic structure, and it's really about the phrasing. The phrasing of the lyrics and the type of lyrics and the creativity of those lyrics. So you have to understand what makes these genres unique.
It's like Bob Dylan, the music is, but what he can't sing.
You don't study Bob Dylan to learn how to be a great singer.
Right. It's the storyteller. You learn how to.
You really want to sing.
But it's how he, speaks to you with his stories, and that's I came to Bob Dylan late in my life, in my college years, and I didn't like it at first, but then once you get it, you get what he's talking. It just you can't. It's like, okay, I get it. And I've had that happen to me a lot of times with music, and stuff, and it's just like you don't get it at first, but then once it sinks in, then you're like, I understand now.
Yeah, and that's a really neat point, because when I'm coming to music that maybe I don't personally relate to,
Yeah.
I always come to it with the attitude of, especially if it's something I need to absorb for some reason,
Mm-hmm.
I come to the attitude of, okay, there are a lot of people who really are passionate about this music.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? What is it that speaks to them about this music? And I'm trying to find that element. I want to know why it is that people think this is spectacular, even if I don't. Because if I can wrap my head around that, then suddenly it opens up.
Yep.
And you say, oh, this is what makes it interesting. Okay, that's what I need to, that's why people listen to this music.
Yep.
That's what I need to focus on.
It's similar to our conversation of where you're from. Like, you don't understand who you are until you leave where you're from. Same with music, you know, you don't understand who is speaking to you, like what music will speak to you. You might not listen to it, but like you said, you come to it, and then why? And then you go away from it 2 weeks, a month, 6 months later, and then the light bulb comes on. You'll like hear that song, or you'll hear that thing that you're listening. I get it.
Yeah.
You know, I love when that happens.
I will even sometimes talk to other people who like that style of music.
Yeah.
And try to get them to talk to me about it.
Right.
I want to know what is it that you like about it. And sometimes that can be really useful, especially if it's another musician.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can be useful if it's a non-musician.
Yeah.
Other times, if it's a non-musician, you get stuff and you walk away and say, well, okay, I get that you like it, but that didn't help me at all.
Another band was U2. I know. Back in high school, I had friends that would just listen to them all the time. Back when we had CD disc changers, we could put like 100 discs. Yeah. So they put it on like just every album, and I'd be like, okay, guys, we need to listen to some other. Because back then I was into heavy metal, like Metallica and all the thrash metal. And then it wasn't until later I heard the song, and I was like, oh man, I get it. I get why they like it now, and now I like them, you know? So it's just, it's funny how that stuff works, you know?
U2 is an interesting band for me, because, you think of tunes like, Where the Streets Have No Name. I don't know if you know that tune.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of their more famous ones. Yeah. There's a certain quality to Bono's voice that is really what draws people into that music in a lot of ways. I mean, aside, they have this neat way of kind of building these textures that just kind of get bigger and bigger, and it feels like it's reaching out and kind of expanding beyond what it's supposed to be.
Yep.
But part of the magic of that is Bono's voice,
which
isn't a particularly, it's not a pure tone, and it's not a tone that we would encourage a trained singer to cultivate.
Right.
But very often that's part of what makes a lot of pop music engaging, is because of the fact that it has,
it's imperfect.
His voice, he has that kind of, it's almost a howl at times.
It's hard to really pinpoint what, because
and when he gets up into his high register, where you can it sounds like he's straining.
Falsetto, it's falsetto voice,
Right,
exactly.
But it sounds like he's pushing his vocal cords a little too much, which he's not. It's just the character of his voice. But it gives a certain intimacy to it, where you feel like you're connecting with him in some way. You feel like he's bearing his soul to you.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what a lot of the really good pop singers who sometimes don't have the best traditional voice that we would see, from a musical standpoint, they're able to connect in that way because it feels so intimate, and it feels like they are being genuine with you.
Bob Dylan, there you go. He's not the best singer in the world, but he draws you in with those stories, and the tone of his voice and what he's talking about makes sense. It's like you said, it's a package, and it just all works, and you can't replicate that. And to study that is well, how does he do that? But only he can do that. I mean, we've heard people that try to sound like him, and you're like, sorry, it's not gonna work. And then there's that song, I can't remember who it's from, but it's so in the style of it, from that era of Bob Dylan, and it's like you can tell he's trying to be Bob Dylan. It's like, nope, I'm sorry, there's only one. And same with
don't even bother with that.
But it's good to take elements from it and use that and make it your own. And I guess that's the moral of everything. Like if you love John Williams, you love Hans Zimmer, study what they do, take what they do, but make it your own.
Right. And get down to those elements that what is that makes John Williams stuff interesting to you.
Yeah.
And then use that to base your own ideas around.
One thing I've learned from John Williams, he loves triads. Spread like on the horns and trumpets. I've noticed that. And then when I went and saw him live, he loves the glockenspiel, and I never realized how loud that instrument is in a symphony.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wow. It's
yeah, you can have the whole orchestra just
but that
blasting away,
thing,
and just one little ding, and that glockenspiel will cut through like a laser beam.
I never knew that. Like I said, and that's one thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
you want to talk about orchestration? That is one of the things that we really miss with
samples.
With samples, with anything working in the box.
Yep.
And I hear this all the time, is that people, they don't have a sense of how these instruments actually function in real life. Now, there will be people who will immediately come back and hammer you with, yes, but we're writing within the box, so we don't have to worry about those rules.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, I get that. But if you want your music to sound like something that is live, you've got to be aware of these rules. You've got to be aware of the fact that, and I shouldn't even say rules, they're really just the practical physics of the different instruments. You know, something like a piccolo. A piccolo is another one of these instruments that is just going to cut through like a laser beam, no matter where you put it. The whole orchestra can be playing, you stick that piccolo on top, and man, suddenly
you're going to hear it.
You're going to hear it.
And same with horns.
Or little rules like not, I know some people who will say never write the flute in a high register or the piccolo simultaneously with a triangle hit.
Okay.
Because the triangle will make the piccolo or flute sound out of tune.
Oh, wow.
Because you got all the harmonics in the triangle right in the same frequency range, and it'll just. Now, I've seen it work sometimes. I've seen other times. Well, and you never know what triangle you're going to get, because all triangles sound a little bit different. Yeah. And which is why percussionists carry more than one triangle with them usually. And there's different ways you can get different sounds out of it, but still, you're setting yourself up for that potential problem. An attack on both the triangle and the flute or the piccolo at exactly the same time. That attack there's the potential that it'll sound out of tune.
Wow, I didn't
make you friends with the piccolo player or flute player, because then they're looking at them going, hey, you sound out of tune, and they're going, I'm not out of tune.
Because it's just the harmonics from the triangle and it mixing with that. Yeah, same with strings, and that's another thing I learned going to the live orchestra. Strings are not that loud. They are not that loud, but with sample libraries, we've made them like Austin out, and then you have six horns blowing. Like, it's like, dude, that ain't gonna work,
No. Well, so, and that's part of the problem that you get when you spend a lot of time studying film scores too. Yeah. Is that you get this unnatural sound. Especially the scores of Hans Zimmer's are a classic example of this. He will write things that don't work in a traditional orchestral setting, but because we're recording them and we can close mic and we can play with all the balances and everything, you can create these sounds that don't work for real, which becomes a problem when those scores then go and have to be performed live.
I bet. But that's what he does, though. That's what Hans does. Like, that's what he wants. I think he's over the orchestral thing. Like, I'm gonna write like John. He's over that, and he's done that. And this is what he does. And I think sample libraries for a guy like him and people like that is a beautiful thing. You know what I mean? Right. It's like, oh my God, now I have these new palettes to make all these cool sounds and stuff. So I get that. So if you're not trying to go for that.
And when you go to record it, though, you have to also understand that he's got a lot of resources behind him.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, for example, when I'm orchestrating on something, my goal, I'm a very pragmatic orchestrator. My goal is to make sure that we can realize, this is what the composer wrote. Yeah. I want to orchestrate this in a way that gets the composer the sound that they are intending from this in the most efficient and quick way possible. Because in the studio, time is money. Yeah. So if that means we have to go back and do another take because the balance isn't right or something, I consider that a bit of a failure on my part. Okay. I should have been able to come up with a solution there that would enable us to be able to get that first take. Just boom, we go in and nail it, and the balances, tweak this or that, and go, and we get it in the can, and we're moving on to the next cue. Right. Somebody like Hans Zimmer, if you have something written like that and then orchestrated that way, there's kind of just the assumption that, okay, we're going to have to take the time to break this out, to mic it differently, to do whatever needs to be done in order to achieve that effect. Right. And that's a thing when people go to record live, if they don't have a lot of experience, that they often forget about, is that when you go and record this thing live, unless you're willing to put in the extra time and do all these extra things, you've really got to think about orchestral balance and how these instruments behave. Otherwise, it's added expense. Exactly. Yeah, and I think that lost art is being lost right now, and what's going on, because people aren't coming from a background like you have, that learn the instruments and learn the ranges and orchestration. It's just like, hey, I got these samples and I'm just, playing them, and I'm guilty just as much, but I'm one of those purists that's like, I gotta learn the orchestra. I gotta learn how to do this the right way. Because I'm pretty sure that's why I encourage people to study classical scores. Yeah, instead of film scores. Yeah, what you see is what you get. Yeah,
exactly.
That score was written to work because there wasn't any other way around it. Well, this becomes an issue with poor orchestrators too.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize the amount of money that poor orchestrators will cost on a project. You get composers who don't know any better. Well, basically, it's all in the sampler, so I just have to hand it off to my intern or something and basically just have them notate it out, and then we're done. Yeah, and then you show up, and it sounds terrible, and they're blaming the musicians for it.
Yeah.
And no, actually, that was because somebody didn't take the time to rework what worked in the sampler doesn't work in a live situation all the time.
Right. I think it's key that you're saying this because a lot of composers don't know this side of it. They just, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, it's just in my DAW and that's it. You're going to listen to that. It's like, but if you're going to play live, that's not it. It's got to be on paper.
Yeah, and I often see this where people will say to me, well, it's already all sequenced. It's all orchestrated. I just need somebody to do score prep.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually tell them, okay, so do you have a score already printed out that needs to be cleaned up? And they say, well, no, that's what I'm hiring you for. And my answer is, in that case, it's not orchestrated. They believe that just because I've chosen which instruments play what, that's orchestration. And it's not. And a piece isn't orchestrated until you have a score, a printed score with all of the dynamics, with all of the articulations, everything written out, that you can then hand off to a copyist who can then create all the individual musician parts. I mean, until that score is in existence, whether it be electronic or on paper, a piece is not orchestrated. So that's a very important issue that a lot of composers who are just inside the box don't understand. They think they've done all the orchestration because they don't understand how much more work actually needs to be done to realize this for live musicians.
Wow. I'm glad you said that. Like, so what's some piece of advice to give a composer to, for you? Like, how would you like to receive it? If, like, say they're in a box composer, like most people are today.
I mean, the deliveries I usually get, one of the first things I ask for is, if it's something that I can just take, first of all, understand I'm not going to have all the sample libraries that somebody has. There's no way I can have, I mean, I suppose I could have every sample library that every person could potentially
use. Yeah.
But that's pointless because I wouldn't have it all set up the way you do and everything else.
Yeah.
So generally people are going to send me an MP3 file so that I can hear what the actual audio is, what the final track is.
Yeah.
And then they're going to send me, if I have to do the MIDI takedown at this point, then I ask for all of their tracks reduced down to individual instruments. Give me all your violin stuff, or unless it depends on the composer, depends on how they've broken things up. But let me see. Okay, here are the violin tracks. Here are the viola tracks. Here. Okay. For some of actually for strings, very often I'll say just give me the string tracks.
Okay.
Because just because you wrote something on a viola, I may end up putting it in the cello. Or something like that in order to. And it depends on the composer. Some composers are like, no, leave it just exactly as I did. Okay, if there's a real issue or something, I may pick up the phone and say, hey, this is going to be a problem. Can you let me touch it? Sometimes they'll say no. All right. Then you'll deal with it. I had one project, for example, where they wrote low French horns all over the place, and the melody was being carried in these really low French horns, and it was supposed to be really big, and because they were using the Conan score as a reference, which had they had like 12 horns or something on that score back in the 80s when they did it. Yeah. And when you listen to it, it's a mess. I mean, it's a total mess. It's a cool sound, and it's very barbaric, and it's very rough around the edges.
It works for that film.
Acoustically, it's just a disaster. So they wrote all these low French horns, and I said, look, can you let me revoice this in the trombones? Mm-hmm. Because in that section, the trombones are going to give you that meat. They're going to bark the way you want them to. It's going to have this kind of edge and the bravado that you want, and the horns aren't going to give you that. Really.
Right. Yeah.
No, this has to be horns. This has to be horns. Okay. Yeah. All right. Fine. It's your piece, and I can orchestrate it that way. And so I just did it the way they asked, and sure enough, we got into the recording session. It's like I can't hear the melody. And I'm on the podium, and I said, yeah, okay, horns. Can we have you play out a little bit more? And then it comes back. We still, that melody is just not carrying. That's supposed to be the big thing. And I know. Okay, trombones. Can you play a little less? And
there it is.
And I remember saying to the engineer, John, can you just, you're going to have to goose the horns. There's just no way. Oh, can we layer them up? Can we do another pass of the horns? Yeah, we can do another pass of the horns, but it's still not going to get
do what you want. Yeah.
It's just still not. Exactly. So things like that. So for that reason, sometimes I will say, for strings especially, sometimes I'll say, just give me strings. It doesn't have to be broken out exactly, because I can listen to the MP3 and see what you did. Mm-hmm. But everything needs to be labeled. Oh my gosh. sometimes, somebody sends you over a MIDI file and it's just, track 1 and then staccatos and then this. It's like, I got no idea what's what. And I'm looking at like 40 tracks. Oh, and that's the other thing. I tell people, crunch it down and quantize it too.
Yeah.
So that I can, just for the output, so that I can throw it into a notation program and it's not just all gobbledygook and everything's on 30-second notes and all that stuff. Because you don't want to pay me for the time to sort through all that.
I bet.
That's crazy.
Man, I can only imagine.
It's not my job.
Well, you don't mind, but yeah, I mean, to make your life easier.
No, come on, man.
Well, yeah. I know. You don't want to spend your time doing that, but
I don't mind pulling out my fingernails either.
Right. Wow.
I'm not your musical janitor.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and I think a lot of guys today, or whatever, think that, right? I mean, that's what they think you are, kind of, or no?
Yes and no.
Okay.
The thing is this: you can have, like, for example, Danita and I, when we provide these services to composers, what we do is we can take it from the composer's desktop through a recording session. Everything that needs to be done to prep the music, to hire the musicians, to book it, to orchestrate it, to get the parts done, all that stuff. So one of the services we can provide is cleaning up the MIDI before it goes to an orchestrator. That's fine. People can do that. It's incredibly labor intensive. It's a lot of time, especially if it's being done by somebody who's not, directly connected to the composer. Yeah. It costs money.
I bet.
That's where the problem lies. And if somebody comes, well, our budget is only this. Okay, well then don't, or when suddenly the budget starts going up and, well, you said it was going to cost this much. Well, yeah, but you gave us materials, and usually we don't like to leave it till the end. We'll call them up and say, hey, look, what you gave us is going to result in us having to rethink the budget because it's going to be too much work. So it's not a case of it can't be done, and it's not a case of composers and a lot of times composers do just want to shovel stuff off. I'm done with this cue. I just want to throw it off to somebody else to take care of this stuff. That's all fine, and that can be done, provided there are the resources there to do it.
Okay. So just be cognizant of that.
Because people think that, big name composer X, he just hands it all off to somebody, and they, to a music service somewhere or something, and they transcribe the MIDI and they transcribe this and they do all this other stuff, and then it gets sent off to an orchestrator, and the orchestrator does this, and all the parts are made and the printing's done and everything, and he doesn't even have to worry about anything, or she never even had to consider that. That's great. That they also spent, $300,000 just on music prep for that one part of the film or something. Yeah. And that's why they have all this.
Yeah. You don't.
So, right. And you've got $15,000 to do, an entire film, and that's just not going to happen with that kind of stuff. It's just never going to work. You can't expect people to do all that.
Right. Exactly.
Because, and the other thing to understand is that one person can't do it all on a big film like that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of moving parts. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Right. And you start calling in other people and things. Well, those people have to be paid too.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe Blow, musician, who got called in just to do MIDI takedown and put it into some sort of a little sketch that can actually make musical sense out of it. That person isn't doing this just for the love of your music. That person got called in to do this kind of dirty job. Yeah. And they're expecting to be paid for it. So we can't just say, oh, can you give me a break on this? No, Joe Blow is going to say to me, screw you. I got another job I'll go do.
Yeah. See ya. Have a good day.
Life, man. I don't need to be doing this at 3 a.m.
Right. Oh, man. I can only imagine. Well, I don't know much more time you got.
3 a.m. thing is the other. Yeah, I'm just about out of time here.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought.
The 3 a.m. thing is the other thing. Is people think, oh, well, everything in Hollywood gets done overnight.
Yeah.
And it does. And and in cases it does, but you pay through the nose for it because now you're paying people double time and overtime and all this other stuff. It's just crazy.
Well, Jason, man, I really appreciate having the conversation today. It's been wonderful. I've learned a lot of stuff, and it's good to talk about someone in the industry. It's actually doing it. It's been around. You've been seasoned, and it's a different side of the. We don't get to hear a lot about orchestration and stuff, so it's cool.
Yeah, really, it's also just great to talk to somebody else from the Midwest who has kind of the same background and can think in terms of culturally the same way.
I understand. You don't have to tell me. I get it because I was the same way. I was raised the same way. But do you have anything you want to plug where people can find you or anything like that?
No, I mean you can look me up on IMDb, and usually people can find me through there or something, or LinkedIn. I don't have a project I'm plugging at this point or anything. Maybe at some point I'll have something. Usually if people need me, they'll find a way to find me.
They'll find you. That's good to know. That's a good thing to have too. You don't have to worry about it. If I'm in need, they know where I'm at. They know how to get a hold of me. So that's cool.
Well, yeah. Or they can contact you if they want. I don't know how many people are actually going to be watching this.
You'd be surprised. It's starting to take off a little bit, and so like I said, I do this because I know there's a lot of people out there that just get started and they need to know the real way, and and show how to do this stuff. So that's why I hold these. So hopefully it grows.
One thing I will say is people hear me talking about working on big films and TV shows and things like that. That's part of what we do. Right now, Danita and we also do smaller projects for other people. And one of the things that people don't realize is that we can scale our work up and down for a smaller, if it's a smaller project that only requires 2 people, we can do that. And it's at a different price point. One of the things that's really important for composers to understand is don't be afraid to reach out and get the help you need on a project.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask up front for that budget, and don't be afraid to call in, a music services company like Danita and myself or someone else up front at the budgeting stage.
Okay.
Because that can be really helpful, because when you're trying to figure, when you're doing that back and forth dance with the director of, well, how much is it going to cost? Well, what do you want to do?
Right.
We can start to figure in numbers for that so that it's all built into at the beginning, so that it's not just this thing if they hired the composer and then later on, oh gosh, it's going to cost us another $200,000-$300,000 or whatever,
right? Exactly.
Or even just an additional $20,000 just to get this thing onto the stand and recorded now. You don't want to have those kind of surprises happen. So
exactly. So you're kind of ahead of the curve.
Line right from the beginning on these projects, and get it clear with whoever the producer or the director is. These are the things we need to think about, and these are where the potential costs lie. Okay. Because that's how people end up in trouble, because then they've blown their whole budget and they forgot.
Yeah, right.
Music preparation, orchestration, and actual copying of parts and librarian work, that's the thing that always gets forgotten. And we've seen it completely deep six a session. It's just, and then they blame them. They think the musicians weren't playing bad, and they have no idea where the actual problem lied.
Right.
And it was just because they weren't thinking about that. So yeah, reach out to somebody ahead of time who can help you spot the potholes and who can help you avoid them.
Nice. Well, thanks again, Jason. I really appreciate it, man.
Good to talk to you, Todd.
You too, man. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.